Welcome to the Sustainability in Motion podcast, brought to you by ED4S. We focus on the fast-moving sustainability world to help the business community better understand the sustainability and environmental challenges we face. I'm Matt Orsagh, Chief Content Officer at ED4S.
And hello, I'm Nawar Alsaadi, founder and CEO of Kanata Advisors and Chief Advisor to ED4S.
Today, we're going to be talking about ESG from the legal perspective and training in-house counsel and boards to address ESG risks and opportunities. We'll be talking to Christine Uri, founder of ESG for In-House Counsel. Christine, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Matt. I'm happy to be able to talk with your audience about how these challenges are playing out with in-house legal teams.
All right, before we get into the big important questions, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got here.
Wonderful. I'm a lawyer by training. I've been a lawyer for 20 years. I spent 10 years in a law firm and then 10 years in-house in an energy company called NG. And while I was at NG, I was a chief legal officer and a chief sustainability officer. I touched about every area of sustainability, carbon, water, waste, getting into human rights, ethics, all of those things. And then I decided to leave and start my own venture. Today, I work with general counsel on setting up ESG programs to meet client and investor expectations.
That's great. Very succinct bio. You may win the award for the shortest bio. Well done.
Audience isn't here to hear about me.
Yeah, I always enjoy going to conferences and you see those bios of people that are 2 pages long that no one ever reads and no one never speaks. But thank you. All right, let's get right into things. There's a conflict between the investor side of things and the policymaker side who wants more information about sustainability metrics, and then the corporate point of view, where they tend to feel a little overwhelmed by all the ESG reporting that they're required to do. And I understand both sides. Where are we now? Where are we going? And kind of what's the balance between that you see? Because you've seen it from both sides.
From an investor perspective, we should remember ESG reporting started with investors. Investors were looking for more data on non-financial factors, specifically environmental, social, and governance. They wanted this data in order to be able to make better investing decisions. Companies reacted by providing the data, but there were no set standards. So companies were providing the data in all kinds of formats, in different lengths, using different languages, and this made it really hard for investors to compare. Now, investors worked with regulators. They were making this discussion about how to get this data apples to apples. That's where regulators stepped in, and we're talking largely European regulators. In the US, there's still not a ton of ESG regulation or ESG disclosure regulation out there. So regulators stepped in to try to meet the investor needs and make sure that companies' statements were true and accurate. Now, coming out of Europe, we have a large regulatory disclosure scheme called the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that covers 13 different subjects. It can be over 1,000 questions. It is, very, very impactful. It's probably more than investors were looking for to begin with. Investors most likely, most of them will want simpler data sets that are easier to ingest and compare. Now, companies are really struggling with this, and there's companies that are subject directly to the CSRD. There are about 50,000 companies by the time it's fully implemented that will fall within that bucket. And then there's the downstream companies. So the CSRD requires you to collect information downstream from your suppliers. And so those companies are also kind of struggling with this data collection process.
Christine, just staying a little bit longer with the reporting side before changing gears. So you have an interesting perspective on reporting from the legal side. But if you look at the corporate landscape, sustainability reporting doesn't sit in the same department in companies within the same industry or in different industries. Sometimes it's within the finance department. Sometimes it's with legal, sometimes with sustainability. Could you just speak to us potentially about these differences? And where do you think sustainability reporting should sit? I mean, should any specific department take ownership? And if so, which one?
Yeah, this is the common debate that's happening around executive teams and boards all the way around the world. Right. I think people find it difficult because there isn't one right answer. Different companies are constructed in various ways. The kind of breadth of what any department does changes. And also there are changes between different leaders. To some extent, it matters, do you have a leader behind it that is going to push things forward in this ESG or sustainability sphere? Companies that have, a standalone chief sustainability officer, that can be, a really powerful model. But that person has to have support from so many other departments. You have to make sure that you're not structuring it in a way that it's getting siloed. More and more, you're seeing chief finance officers take this over because there is so much reporting and it's supposed to be integrated with the financial reporting. It's a common model. And then, from a legal perspective, a legal team perspective, there's really two categories of stakeholders or kind of approaches for legal teams. And the first, which every legal team falls in, is that they need to have some awareness of what's happening with sustainability and ESG to ensure that their companies aren't, getting ahead of themselves, making statements that would be greenwashing, triggering up some kind of risk. To make sure that they have the right provisions in their contracts. So if they need to collect data, that they can do that. Make sure that they're complying with various regulations. All of that's just bread and butter legal department stuff. And then there's also a group of legal departments where they really are taking on company leadership for sustainability and ESG. I've seen that estimate between 10 and 15% of companies are having this function fall within legal. I think you'll see that continue to increase as more regulations come into effect. But a lot of times, that's also just a function of the size and maturity level of the company and how many different leaders you have across the board.
I think that's a great point, and we hear from investors and companies both who are trying to do this, especially with things like CSRD on the horizon, and they're a bit overwhelmed. Like, how do I do this? What do I do? Just give me the right answer, to how to do this. And it's a little more complicated than that. And you're right. It depends on the structure of the company. If it's a lot of reporting, it's going to fall more to legal. It depends on the industry. You may need a more powerful CSO or CSO with more staff, depending on the industry. And I've heard this phrase a couple of times, that the chief sustainability officer is really your CEO. And it needs to start from there, from the board and management, and be embedded in the culture. And then that starts with the CEO. If, you can still have a CSO in those kind of functions, but the culture starts there.
Yeah.
I mean, talking about simplifying all of this, and Christine, you share an incredible amount of useful content on your LinkedIn. I mean, you're one of my favorite contributors. You have just this uncanny ability of taking very complex topics and kind of cutting them into bite-sized pieces. And within that context, I read one of your posts recently where you spoke about a concept I believe you coined called minimum viable reporting. I wonder if you can walk us through this and potentially help explain how we could simplify some of what we are talking about, some of these concepts that we just talked about.
So from a U.S. perspective, very, very few companies are subject to the regulation that you're seeing in the CSRD right now. Maybe your larger companies would be required under a European regulation, but it's still more of an exception than a rule. And for your mid-market companies, I see them struggling between two extremes. There's mid-market companies that just haven't gotten off the ground with ESG. It feels too kind of overwhelming, too big of a thing to take on. And then I also have found companies that are in the mid-market that maybe 3 years ago made a huge effort to put out a giant, sustainability report, 75, 100 pages. Those often take 5 months to create. They, are well into the six figures to get them put together. And then based on the company size, it's just not a repeatable process because they don't have the budget, they don't have the teams, it ends up getting stale. And at the same time, companies in this mid-market are under tremendous pressure from clients and investors to provide useful information. A lot of it's on carbon footprint or DEI, different subjects depending on the industry, but clients and investors want information. And so my advice and what I work with my clients on is, all right, how do we find this middle ground? Let's, depending on the size of your organization, let's scale this back. Let's not try to do a 75-page or 100-page report that you're not going to be able to repeat again. But let's get some proactive information out to your clients. Because if your clients are coming to you with these massive questionnaires and all you can do is kind of fill in a few bubbles, what'll happen is you'll end up with clients and investors kind of trying to impose their standards on you because you haven't already kind of developed your own playbook. But if you can put together, 10 pages describing what your program is, what your approach is, what your risks are, what you're doing, and be willing to communicate what you're not doing because maybe it's not as relevant to your business. It'll go a long ways to having your stakeholders believe, okay, they have this in hand. Great, they're taking action, and it'll provide direction for your company. So, I feel like we've kind of gone to this extreme where some people are reporting so much that it sets the level so high that others aren't trying. So how can we kind of bring this together? And that's what I call the minimum viable report for ESG.
Just on that point, one of my most popular posts on LinkedIn was a post I think I put a year ago where I said at any time I'll take a 10 pages report over 100 pages report full with, graphs and charts and things like this, but 10 pages that are really meaty you with content, I'll take that anytime. And I think it was, like 250,000 views and hundreds of likes. Just there is clear demand and interest in something like that.
Yeah.
Amen to the minimum viable reporting. Coming from an investor's point of view, I started out, back at this place called Governance Metrics International, which became part of MSCI, and we read way too many proxy statements from around the world. And us as people researching this and talking to investors over the years, a good short story that tells me what I need to hear is much more valued than just filling out an Excel spreadsheet and throwing it in a report. So tell your story. Tell it succinctly as possible and tell it well. And the point I really want to drive home is make it repeatable year after year, because you're going to have to do this every year. And don't set, think you have to impress anyone with a 150-page glossy report. You're not impressing anybody except the people who edit it for you with the money you pay them, and write it and edit it for you. Investors don't care. They just want the information. They want it to be comparable, repeatable, auditable. It's really pretty basic stuff, and good storytelling is what we're after as investors.
Yeah. I mean, I do this for a living and I don't want to read a 150-page report. So have to think about the value. And certain companies, you get to an enterprise global level, you have complicated stuff going on. You have to explain more things. You're reporting under the CSRD, but that's not the majority of companies. So you need to kind of find that approach that is readable, is repeatable. Hopefully you might need some help to kind of get it off the ground, but then handle a lot of it internally. And what I find is that a lot of times companies just need somebody to kind of tell them that's okay. Tell them it's okay to set the bar there.
Yeah. Tell your story how you want to tell it. You're not someone else. Yeah. No, that's great advice. All right, moving on to another interesting topic that's increasingly becoming part of the landscape is it's good to have a lawyer on the podcast, because we're seeing a lot more focus on climate litigation over the past couple of years, but that's going to expand into more natural capital issues over time. I'm just curious your thoughts on where we are and where you see that going in coming years and what companies need to be doing about it.
Yeah, the climate litigation is definitely on the increase. There's a ton of studies that show that, and it makes sense that it's on the increase. And we saw kind of this first wave, I'd say, 2015 to 2020, with companies coming out with more disclosures related to climate, and setting really, as you got into 2020, 21. Net zero targets related to climate. There's more information on websites. And at the same time, it's kind of, I feel bad for some of the companies, honestly, that came out with earlier statements, because then the terminology itself has actually shifted over time or taken on new meanings, that now a lot of times they might get caught up with terminology they were using that shifted. Or, the thing that really catches up companies is if they've made different statements about a particular topic. So basically, as companies are sharing more information, it does create fodder for litigation. It's kind of an unfortunate little catch-22. The other piece that's happening is that activists in this area are getting a lot more savvy. The way that you use activist litigation is you build out kind of a game plan, and then you just chip away at it, going after particular industries or particular approaches to figure out what works. And the activist litigants have been at this for a while, so they're kind of perfecting their approaches, and that's just a pace that's going to continue. What companies need to do is really be watching those public statements. Set up a review process where, in order to make a statement on your environmental performance, it has to go through a certain series of reviews to make sure that you can really back it up and be willing to defend that in public.
Yeah, and that would get back to the increasing role of the general counsel's office in these kind of roles.
Yep. And an increasing need for the general counsel to get very savvy on these issues. So to be able to spot, okay, that's a risk, that's something that we need to dig into further.
I think that part of the conversation can go a long time, especially when we start speaking about language and the nuance of language. And obviously, Christine, you're based on your legal background, you're very familiar with that. But I'm not going to go into that minefield. I'm gonna go into the magic wand question. We often have this question, Matt, around. We ask our guests if they could change one thing in their industry. And your perspective here is really interesting because you worked with large institutions, large companies, you worked as a consultant and with companies, it seems to me, in different industries. If there was something you could change, Christine, within the ESG landscape to basically make this exercise better for all parties. Whether it's on the reporting side, on the framework, on the mindset of doing it, what would be the singular thing that you think we should change or you could change if you had this magic wand that would make all this better?
I live on the company side these days. And so I think the more that you can bring simplicity to it, the more progress we'll make. If you ask companies to do 1,000 things, none of them are going to happen. You have to really be very directed, clear, have clear steps, and make it something that companies can step into over time.
Well, so I'll follow up on this. So, that sounds great to me. But then a company would come to you and says, okay, but we have to meet CSRD. There's 1,200 metrics. There's this other framework. There's this other framework. It's all too complicated. How do you reconcile that with where we are now? Obviously, unfortunately, I know you don't have that magic wand and you can't make that happen. Is there a middle ground between the complexity that we're seeing and the simplicity that you'd like to see?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think you're going to find simplicity with the CSRD. I think that ship has sailed. I do believe that things are going to get easier in the coming years. I have personally integrated many different regulatory schemes as a general counsel over the years. And the first time that you go through it is always the hardest. And then each time you build your methodology, you build your templates, it gets a little bit easier. So unfortunately, right now, companies that are having to report under the CSRD for the first time are in this kind of juggernaut of having to figure everything out. And everybody's kind of going through it collectively. So it's not like there's really a path ahead that you can follow. I personally believe this will get easier just based on how I've seen companies react to different regulatory schemes across the board. I'm not sure if I answered your question in there, though. The magic wand question. I was thinking about it. I'm kind of off script now, but my magic wand version would be for companies to accept that they are that doing something on ESG has become non-optional, like to take apart, get rid of the anti-ESG movement and excuse for not taking any kind of action, and realize, okay, this is something that's not going away. But that's not really from an ESG profession perspective. That's more like, can we just move past this? Like, am I actually going to have to measure my carbon footprint? Yes, you are. That kind of stuff. So.
It's your magic wand, Christine. You can do with it whatever you want to do.
So are you saying in the 7 stages of ESG reporting brief for people to move on to the final acceptance phase? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's a good way. That's a good way of putting it. So I don't know if you want to re-ask the question. I can re-answer it, but.
No, I think we're good. I think it's great. We tackled it, I think, from different aspects. But I'll hand the baton to Matt because I think he has a follow-up question or maybe just a next question.
Well, that relates a little bit onto. We wanted to talk a little bit about not to have a blatant advertisement in the podcast, but a little bit about what you're doing. Your business, how you started it, how is it going? What services do you offer to companies? Because I think that's a little bit of a mystery to a lot of people. What does a sustainability consultant do? You're focused on the legal side of things, but how does this work?
So from a sustainability consulting point of view, I got started really just publishing on LinkedIn. If you go to my profile, then you will see a ton of materials that I publish, and it's all geared towards professionals that are needing to tackle ESG for the first time, or trying to make those initial steps a little bit more easy and understandable. I direct a lot of my posts for general counsel, but it would really, the steps apply the same no matter which function you're coming from in leading this. Where I focus, because it's my background, is on helping general counsel who are taking on ESG for the first time. And I have a process that I help them to get things off the ground. So I help them first do an assessment and really try to target what is it that you actually need. You're being asked for 1,000 things. How can we get that down to a list of 20? Really get that targeted must-hit list. Moving through with the executive team, a lot of times the executive team doesn't have a full market understanding of the forces that are driving ESG and why it's important to take action now. So moving through that and then getting that executive alignment around, I'd say 1 to 3 key strategic initiatives that they're going to talk about on a company-wide basis. And this goes to your point earlier about the CEO being the CSO. You really have to create that executive team alignment so that your CEO is out talking about these things and is communicating to the company that these are strategic objectives and they're moving forward. And then you need to get a little cross-functional team launched off. So I help figure out who needs to be on that and what actions need to be taken. And then finally, what we're talking about, the right-sized reporting, making a plan around what is it that you really need to report? What story do you need to tell? What format does it need to be in to make sure that you're getting the stakeholders the information they need and not going overboard on the reporting? As somebody who comes out of sustainability, I have a bias to action. So I want to see companies actually spend their time improving their ESG performance more than reporting it, which is often the trade-off that happens if you spend too much time reporting. You're not actually making progress against your goals. You're just moving into another reporting cycle. So I try to set all of that up so that we can get to having a streamlined system that enables them to have the time to actually take action and make progress.
Well, Christine, I do have a follow-up on this area of consulting. Now, you mentioned in your very brief, very insightful kind of introduction on your bio that you were a general counsel for NG for 10 years. That's a major company, and I would imagine you had a group of people helping you. But I'm curious about the transition from working with a large enterprise like this to launching your consulting kind of business, sustainability consulting. I do come across a lot of people who would like to do that, but there's a transition there that can be tricky. I don't know if you can talk to us about this a little bit, and if you have any advice for somebody that would like to take a similar kind of career path.
Well, it is tricky, I will say, and I'm still very much on the learning path. I had spent a long time in-house, and I felt like I was ready to take on a new challenge, and I wanted to stretch myself. Starting my own business was a great way to do that because I had really wanted, I'd been on this back end side of the world with different functions. And I wanted to move to the front and to do business development and to do sales and to be kind of learn how to interact with clients. So that's really what I'm doing now, is figuring out how all of that works and what my highest and best value is to the market. In terms of advice, I do think it's good to start early building a social media presence. That's been incredibly useful. So getting out there, building your market, building your reputation. You can do that in your current job. Hopefully, there are a few companies that are more restrictive, but the earlier you can start doing that, the better. And then you just really have to be ready with a mindset to give yourself grace for the learning process. The learning process is going to be messy. I'm still in the learning process. I'm learning how to trust that I'm going to come out the other side, or at least start learning something else, kind of getting to the next level. I guess we never stop learning, but it is a completely different mindset to go into.
All right. Well, I hope we haven't tired you out too much. We got one more question for you. It's kind of a crystal ball question. What trends do you see that our listeners should be aware of? They're just on the horizon so that they can be prepared for what's coming in the ESG sustainability world to come?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a couple things that are on the horizon. First, right now, where just the focus in ESG is really climate. And there are a lot of good reasons for that, but it's really driving companies to provide that climate information and to be taking action around climate. But climate isn't the whole environmental story. The next thing that is going to be coming up is really nature and biodiversity. We're already seeing framework reporting organizations start developing the standards around this. We will be hearing more about it. I'm guessing 2 or 3 years before those will really mature. It's something to watch and something to be learning the language around and seeing how companies are adopting nature and biodiversity policies. The other thing that I think you're really going to see it coming out of the CSRD is a path where just the sustainability reporting at some level, not necessarily the 1,000 data points, but it is the norm. It is the expectation. It rolls across businesses. I think about this like GDPR, the European privacy regulation. At GDPR, it was something where it only applied in Europe or to European companies. In the US, at least, we tried to ignore it for a while because it was that crazy European idea. And eventually it became just the business standard because it is too difficult to run a global company with multiple different regimes. And even if you didn't have a global company, then it began to be imposed kind of by market expectations at smaller and smaller business sizes. And now it's just standard operating procedure. So I think we're going to see that same kind of trend with sustainability reporting, and companies just need to start getting prepared for that now. And finally, an accelerant to this, we just saw in Europe the CSRD pass, and that is a directive around supply chain due diligence in particular. And the upshot of that is that European companies or large enterprises there will be doing a lot more due diligence across their supply chains. Companies need to understand that, and if their clients are impacted by the CS3D, start getting ready now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We were joking before we started recording that, all these initiatives are kind of the Sustainability Consultant Full Employment Act, but these things aren't going away. And companies and investors, need to get up to speed, and the sooner they start, the better. And hopefully you can help folks be a part of that. Well, we want to let you go, Christine. Thank you again for your time. Thanks everyone for listening. You can reach all of us on social media, especially LinkedIn. And if you want to hear more about what we're doing at ED4S, you can check us out at ed4s.org. Take care, everybody.